Welcome to The Debate, our program dedicated to the clash of perspectives. What if the most accurate, the most devastating map of a totalitarian regime isn't actually found in a dusty archive, but in a piece of soiled newspaper inside a cattle car?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we are so conditioned to look for the truth of the 20th century in decrees stamped with official seals or, in sweeping demographic statistics.
Exactly.
But numbers numb us, right? They don't really show us how the machinery actually operates inside a human mind.
They really don't. And that's why this program is specifically designed for you, the students of history, the students of philology, and the dedicated researchers who know that sometimes the most ruthless diagnosis of political terror is found through the visceral, often grotesque lens of literature.
Mm-hmm.
We are stepping out of macro history, basically, and into the suffocating micro-reality of the individual.
Yeah, we are dissecting a moment where the state just completely dismantles a person.
Precisely. So, to ground us in this exact reality, I am going to perform a reading of the text we are debating today. And I'm doing this without any cuts, because without feeling the suffocating mechanical rhythm of this prose, our entire analysis just falls apart.
Yeah, you really have to hear it.
Right. This is an excerpt from Maxim Kisly's novel, The Teacher. Close your eyes and listen to the sheer mechanics of this scene. The wagon shakes. The boards creak. The floor is covered with straw. Pipiskin clings to the wall, his back tense.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, he strains over the bucket in the corner of the wagon. At last, he leans forward and, wiping himself with a newspaper, accidentally pokes out the eye of the leader with his middle finger.
Oh, wow.
Seeing this, Pipiskin turns pale and, before Shmurdyakin notices, quickly stuffs the crumpled scrap of newspaper with the smeared portrait of the leader into his mouth and swallows it.
God.
Holding the crumpled newspaper in one hand and clutching his padded jacket with the other, he tenses and whispers under his breath, "We are not slaves. We are not slaves. Don't forget. Don't make a mistake." His trembling hands make it hard to hold on to the remaining scrap.
Right.
Then he sniffs his finger and discreetly wipes it on Shmurdyakin. Looking out through the bars at the endless Kazakh steppe, Shmurdyakin thoughtfully asks, "Comrade Pipiskin, how are we going to teach them if we ourselves know nothing?" Pipiskin, frowning, "We'll teach them what we know. You know how to wipe yourself. I know how to piss standing up. We'll manage. Otherwise, why did the party send us here?"
It is just physically repulsive.
It is designed to be. But we aren't here to flinch, right? We are here to clinically dissect it. From my perspective, this grotesque text is a precise documentarian-level diagnosis of institutional degradation.
Okay.
It represents the deliberate, calculated political replacement of an intellectual elite with, unquestioning biological margins.
I actually read this entirely differently. I mean, the educational mission they are on, the political backdrop, that is all just decorative set dressing to me.
Decorative?
Yeah, completely. What Kisly is really giving us is a profound ontological exploration of personality disintegration. It is the pure non-political anatomy of fear.
Wait, let me stop you at ontological exploration, because we really need to define the stakes here. You're talking about the study of being, like what makes a human human.
Right, exactly.
But you cannot strip the politics out of this text without erasing its fundamental meaning. I mean, we have to look at exactly where this wagon is rolling. Shmurdyakin looks out at the endless Kazakh steppe.
Yeah.
We're talking about an era where 25,000 members of the national Kazakh intelligentsia were deliberately repressed. The scientists, the writers, the thinkers, they were all systematically eradicated.
Right, the state was effectively removing the brain of an entire culture.
Yes, and nature abhors a vacuum, but so does a totalitarian state. How do they fill it? This is the logistics of terror. They run trains out to the steppe loaded with individuals like Pipiskin and Shmurdyakin.
Mm-hmm.
The state burns out the best minds and replaces them with marginalized figures whose only remaining competencies are strictly biological. It isn't just a breakdown of a person, it is a weaponized social commentary.
See, I think the politics is an illusion here. You are looking at this as social journalism,
assuming the author is critiquing a specific historical policy.
Well, isn't he?
No! I think the author is doing something much more subversive. The regime here isn't just replacing elites, it is physically rewiring the human organism. It strips Pipiskin of his status as a thinking subject entirely.
Entirely?
Yes. He is reduced to a basic biological cell, convulsing in terror before an abstract, all-seeing eye, the leader's eye. The true focus is how terror dismantles the soul until there is no citizen left, only a terrified animal.
But if he is just a terrified animal, why is the author so deliberate about the physical space they are in, the creaking boards, the straw, the bucket?
Right.
The system consciously places its so-called educators into a literal cattle pen.
Well, because of spatial determinism.
Meaning the physical box he is trapped in is literally shrinking his brain to the size of that bucket?
Precisely. Imagine an environment so profoundly degraded, so utterly filthy and confined that complex ideas simply cannot survive in it.
Okay.
Political missions cannot survive in it. When a human being is compressed into a literal animal pen, only raw biological instinct remains. The space dictates the reality.
But
The act of defecation is, paradoxically, the only authentic action left to him because the space doesn't allow for higher thought.
But you are isolating the wagon from the world outside of it. The text aggressively resists that isolation. Shmurdyakin is looking through the iron bars at the endless Cossack steppe.
Mm-hmm.
The author is deliberately drawing a contrast. That steppe is a metaphor for a vast open space containing an ancient, deep-rooted culture.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Right? The wagon isn't just a box where a guy loses his mind. It is a weaponized container of existential filth. It is sent specifically to vandalize and overwrite the newly emptied intellectual landscape outside those bars.
You are projecting a sophisticated intellectual framework onto characters who no longer possess intellect, though. You argue their physical vulgarity is their functional political purpose.
Yes, exactly.
But look at what happens when authority intrudes into that tiny space. A sheer accident, poking the newspaper, collides his pathetic physicality with the punishing deity of the system.
Well,
He doesn't think about his mission to the steppe. He shoves feces-covered paper into his mouth and swallows it to avoid execution. The physical boundaries of that wagon dictate everything.
let's look at exactly what he is thinking while he swallows that paper. Because a purely instinctual animal does not whisper state ideology.
Well,
As he is choking on the soiled newspaper, he whispers, "We are not slaves. We are not slaves." We both know what that is.
Right, the phrase "we are not slaves," the very first phrase from the Soviet literacy primer.
Exactly. The foundational ideological mantra of the new free man. And the psychological horror of this scene isn't just that he's terrified.
Mm-hmm.
It's the cognitive dissonance. He is desperately reciting the ideology of absolute freedom at the exact humiliating moment he is performing an act of total animalistic self-degradation.
Wow.
Ideology hasn't disappeared in that wagon. It is functioning as the mantra of a paralyzed mind. The system has terrified him so deeply that his instinct is to literally consume his own dignity while proudly declaring his liberation.
But a paralyzed mind grappling with cognitive dissonance implies a functioning intellect. Listen to the verbs Kisly uses to describe this action.
What about them?
The scene is completely mechanistic. Straining, poking, turning pale, stuffing, swallowing. These are not the verbs of a citizen agonizing over ideological contradictions. These are the reflexes of an organism.
Even an organism doesn't whisper, "Don't forget, don't make a mistake." That implies a terror of stepping outside an ideological line.
It implies classical conditioning. It is a Pavlovian response. Think about how a beaten dog winces before the hand even strikes it.
Right.
The dog isn't pondering the moral justification of the beating. Its nervous system is simply reacting to stimuli. The words "we are not slaves" have been hollowed out of all semantic meaning.
So it's just noise.
It's just noise a biological organism makes to soothe itself while trying to survive the wrath of a punishing God. The totalitarian system has successfully turned a human into an unthinking object.
If he is an unthinking object reacting purely to fear, how do you explain the climax of the scene? After he swallows the paper, he sniffs his finger, And then, deliberately, discreetly, he wipes it on his companion, Shmurdyakin.
Yeah.
That is not a blind reflex. That is a precise, calculated moral choice.
I have to push back there. Applying the concept of moral choice to this wagon is what I would call, ontological pessimism.
Wait, explain that. Why can't we judge his morality?
Because morality requires a thinking subject with agency. Ontological pessimism in this context means accepting that the core essence of humanity has been entirely obliterated.
I see.
You're looking for moral failing in a creature that no longer has the capacity for morality.
The agency is exactly the point, though. To understand the horror of this 20th century, you have to understand how the repressive machine atomizes society. It breaks down solidarity. The fear of the state doesn't unite these two men against their oppressors. It pits them violently against each other.
He wiped his finger on him. It's a grotesque physical act. It's not a political one.
It is the ultimate distilled metaphor for the culture of denunciation. Think about how the Soviet system required complicity. You couldn't just be innocent. You had to participate.
Right, neutrality wasn't an option.
Exactly. To cleanse oneself before the watchful eye of the leader, you must physically and morally smear your neighbor. Pipiskin transfers the infection of state scrutiny to Shmurdyakin.
Like a fatal game of tag.
Yes. He shifts his guilt, his filth, onto someone else to save himself. It is a conscious transfer of liability.
See, that imposes an elegant political structure on a text that aggressively resists elegance. A denunciation implies a relationship between two citizens. It implies a society.
And you're saying?
But this wagon is a post-societal vacuum. Shmurdyakin is not treated as a citizen being denounced. He is not even treated as a human victim. He is treated as an inanimate object, a rag.
But he asks a question right after. He is clearly a person to us.
To us, the readers, sitting comfortably in the future, yes. But to Pipiskin in that blinding moment of terror, no.
Ah.
And that is the true bottomless horror of totalitarianism. It isn't interpersonal betrayal. It's the complete revocation of a person's human status. The regime hasn't just made them turn on each other. It has rewired their brains so they cease to recognize each other as human beings.
That's incredibly bleak.
Pipiskin wipes his finger on Shmurdyakin the way you or I would wipe our hands on a piece of furniture. The being has been erased.
Okay, but if, as you say, they have completely lost their human status and all higher thought, how do you explain Pipiskin's sudden, sharp moment of political clarity at the end of the scene?
Clarity?
Yes. Shmurdyakin looks out at the steppe and asks an essentially existential question. How are we going to teach them if we ourselves know nothing? And Pipiskin answers with absolute terrifying clarity.
Remind me?
We'll teach them what we know. You know how to wipe yourself. I know how to piss standing up. Otherwise, why did the party send us here?
You see intellectual agency in that? It is the absolute height of absurdity.
It is grotesque, yes, but it reveals a crude, perfectly accurate political intuition. Pipiskin understands his mission. He knows exactly what the state wants from him.
I disagree entirely.
He understands his function as social ballast. He knows that his biological crudeness is the curriculum. The great experiment isn't about elevating the steppe, it's about dragging an entire nation down to his level.
Okay, but
When he says, "Why did the party send us here?" he is actively acknowledging his role in the deliberate destruction of a culture.
you are treating the party like a calculating chess master, and you are treating Pipiskin like a pawn who fully understands the board.
I think he does.
But read those words aloud. Listen to the cadence. In the mouths of these characters, the party does not sound like a political organization with a demographic strategy. It sounds like blind, irrational fate.
But the repression of 25,000 intellectuals was not irrational fate. It was logistics. It was a calculated, deliberate spreadsheet of terror.
The historical reality outside the wagon involved logistics, yes, but the literary truth Kisly is exposing inside the wagon is the absolute emptiness beneath those logistics.
Emptiness?
Yes. You say his biological crudeness is the curriculum. I say the dialogue at the end is a metaphor for a ringing, terrifying void.
The system claims to have an educational mission. It builds massive physical infrastructure, trains, quotas, assignments.
Right.
But inside the wagon, there is nothing. The great experiment hasn't created a dark, brilliant political strategy. It has simply regressed human beings back to primates. They are monkeys in a cage, entirely convinced that their cage is a classroom.
I don't think we can separate the historical reality from the literary truth so easily, though. To call them primates is to absolve them of their role in the machinery.
Absolve them?
Yes, we cannot confuse trauma with innocence. Pipiskin is victimized, yes. The system has deformed him, forced him to eat his own filth. But he is also an active participant in transferring that filth forward. He will step off that wagon, he will walk into a school in the Kazakh steppe, and he will enact the violence he has learned.
But that is exactly how the anatomy of fear propagates itself. It isn't a conscious political strategy chosen by Pipiskin, it is a virus.
A virus.
Yes. The system degrades the individual to a biological reflex, and that reflex spreads like an infection. It indiscriminately grinds down both the victim and the perpetrator until you can no longer tell the difference between them.
Right.
The tragedy isn't that he understands his mission. The tragedy is that the fear has consumed him entirely, and now the fear will dictate everything he does.
It is fascinating. We are looking at the exact same text, the exact same visceral imagery of a shaking wagon and a swallowed newspaper. Yet we arrive at two incredibly profound, distinct understandings of the mechanics of totalitarianism.
We really do.
On one side, we have the text as a historical document tracking the precise, calculated tragedy of elite replacement, a diagnosis of a system that intentionally weaponizes biological margins to overwrite an ancient culture.
And on the other side, we have the text as a universal anatomy of fear, an ontological exploration of how absurd violence strips away our humanity, dismantling the mind until nothing is left but an organism reacting to a punishing, irrational fate.
Exactly. And we do not declare winners on this show. We leave it to you, the students of history, the students of philology, and the seekers of truth, to decide which optical lens offers a deeper, more accurate understanding of the text.
Yeah, does the historical framework give the grotesque its meaning, or does the universal breakdown of the human psyche sort of transcend the historical moment?
The beauty of rigorous intellectual exchange is that these perspectives reveal the terrifying complexity of the source material.
There is always more to explore.
Absolutely. And because that exploration relies on this community, please take a second to like this program, subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, write a comment below.
Yeah, let us know what you think.
Share how you read Kisly's text. Tell us whose argumentation felt closer to your own understanding. Did you see the deliberate political weapon or the tragic biological regression?
We'd love to read your thoughts.
I also want to explicitly announce that this program is produced and released in 2 languages. You can find our discussions in both Russian and English, ensuring this dialogue reaches across linguistic boundaries. Usually when we think of history, we look for clarity. We want the clean lines of an archive, the certainty of a date and a signature.
But it's never that clean.
No. We step into the shaking, creaking freight wagon of literature, and suddenly the sterile history is replaced by the visceral, terrifying reality of a man swallowing paper in the dark. It leaves us to wonder. When the archives burn, is the truth of our humanity, or the loss of it, written in the dirt we leave behind?
A haunting thought.
Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time on The Debate.